Hello, my name is Keely and today I am making a Beauxbatons uniform from Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. This is my third attempt at making this costume. I made my first one back in 2013 when I didn't really know how to sew anything, and kinda shows. I mean, parts of the costume were literally held together with safety pins. So I always knew I was going to make another one because I hoped that I'd improve my sewing skills one day. The next one I ended up making was in 2016. I made it for a trip to Universal Studios over in Orlando. I wore it to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, which was so much fun. Like, I got given free butterbeers by the staff. I got to skip lines and stuff because they were all just like, oh, your costume, cool. But after seeing it up close against the Beauxbatons uniforms that they had there at the park, I always knew there's going to be another one. I was never happy with the fabric choice that I used in the second one. I just used a plain satin, used the wrong side of it so it wasn't too shiny, and as a result the fabric was too thick and it didn't drape nicely, not compared to their ones anyway. So that brings me around to attempt number 3. This is my mock-up of my third version, which will hopefully be my final version. It's made from a bed sheet, and this particular bed sheet was horrible to work with due to it. The fabric was just slippery and it warps, so it distorts in a really weird way. However, I'm cheap, couldn't be bothered going out to get a new bed sheet to replace it, so I made do with what I have. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day because this is a mock-up, and the sole purpose of this was just to check my patterning and drafting, so whether my seams were lining up and whether the shapes would actually work on a human form. And as you can see, it worked. So now I want to take you through each element that makes up a Beauxbatons uniform, and after I've done that I'll take you through a brief description of how I went about drafting that particular piece. So first piece that is here is the cape, which has 2 lovely collars attached to it. Underneath the cape we have the dress itself. So the dress has a collar, it buttons in the front, it has long sleeves with 2 pointed cuffs, and then it's quite tight through the waist here, nice and fitted, and then it flares out to just above the knee down the bottom. So the first piece I want to talk about on the dress is the skirt. So for the skirt I used a single pattern, Simplicity 8732, and I didn't have to alter a single thing out of it right out of the packet, so that was fantastic. So the skirt is made up of 6 pieces, and it sits really high just under the bust line, and it's got a nice curved waist. But like I said, didn't have to alter a single thing, straight out of the packet. The next piece I want to talk about is the bodice section here. Now this was drafted using the book Successful Dressmaking by Alan and Marietta Ressex, and it was completely self-drafted from scratch. The reason I wanted to self-draft the bodice is because I couldn't find any commercially available ones that had the buttons in the front, the 3 darts under the bust, and the 2 darts in the back. I could find ones that were close, but I couldn't find anything perfect. So that's where the book came in handy for me. Using the measurement guide found inside of the book, I measured my own measurements because I am making this to fit me, and I was able to draft a simple bodice pattern following their instructions. I did need to alter the dart placement in the bust because their one only came with 1 and I needed 3, but dividing it by maths and doing calculations I was able to turn their 1 into 3. Another thing I had to alter about the simple bodice pattern was adding a button-up centre front. It's not actually here in my mock-up right now, but you can see where the centre front is sitting, and I just need to add an extra bit of length to that so it folds under itself, and then I can add the buttons into the front. I haven't done it on this mock-up because I kinda couldn't be bothered because it's not a functioning button closure anyway. It's going to be sewn flat on the final costume. which probably makes you question, how do you actually get into this dress? So that's a good question. On the ones in the film and the Universal Studio costumes, they have a zipper in the back of the costume, centre back, and it is disgusting. I think it's so visible and you can see it and it just cuts up the costume, and I really don't like the way how that looks. So what I've opted to do in my own version here is put a zipper in the side under the sleeve where it should have gone in the first place, because then it doesn't cut the back up, you don't need to cut the collar in half, and I think it just sits a lot nicer. The next part of the bodice I'd like to talk about is the collar here. So originally I drafted a collar using the techniques in the book, and I made a huge mistake of not checking my reference photo before I actually did that. And so I ended up drafting this amazing shirt collar. The only issue is that it had a fold in it, whereas after checking my reference photo, which I should have done in the first place, I saw that the collar on the dress lays flat and flush with the dress itself. And so then I had to find a different technique to draft the collar because my book didn't have that particular pattern in it. So looking back through my reference photos, I discovered one of them was actually a picture of the paper pattern that they had used for drafting the costumes in the film. And that paper pattern had little black dots all the way down it. And it turns out those black dots were actually 1-inch markers, which made my job of drafting this pattern based on that phenomenally easy. So all I had to do was count how many black dots there were in any given section of the collar, and then transfer that onto my own. For example, this point piece here was 9 dots long on the reference image, so all I had to do was make sure that my collar piece was 9 inches long. To get the collar itself lying flat and flush with the rest of the dress, all I did was take the bodice pieces here, lie them flat on a mat, and then trace the neckline out. And from that traced piece, I then made my adjustments in the shape, and then voila, a collar piece was born. So the next part of the bodice is the sleeve here, and as you can see, it is a long cuffed sleeve. So I drafted the sleeve pattern itself using the same book as before. The changes I made to it was adding fullness into the top because there's gathers at the top of the sleeve. To do that, I used the slash and spread method, where I cut slightly into the top of the sleeve, spread it out a little bit, and then traced off a new sleeve pattern, and that gave me room to do gathers at the top of the sleeve. The next part of the sleeve is the cuffs. The cuffs are unique because there's actually 2 of them and they have a long pointed edge. I've only drafted one here because the shape of both of them is exactly the same, so I only need to make sure that one of them worked. I drafted the cuffs using the techniques found in successful dressmaking. They actually have a cuff pattern in there that has elongated points. They're not quite as long as I wanted them, so I just extended them by a couple of centimetres, but that was fantastic for me. The opening of the cuff is on the outside of the sleeve because the points of the cuff line up with the pinky finger of the wearer. However, there's only one seam on the sleeve itself, and that's on the inside. So, using techniques found in the book again, I was able to insert an opening on the outside of the sleeve. Which brings me back to the cape. The final piece I want to talk about here is the cape. Now the cape was really simple to draft. It is just a circle. The cape is just a circle. You can tell this by how on pictures of the costume, the point in the front here sits lower on the wearer than the points on the sleeve do. So it sort of heads up on a diagonal. Then it sits lower in the back. Another thing I noticed is that there are no seams in the cape whatsoever, so that just made it simple. I used a circle skirt calculator to figure out how wide I needed to make the opening in the neck, and then how long I needed to make the skirt itself. No, it's not a skirt, it's a cape. The difficult part of patterning the cape was actually the collars, but even then it wasn't too hard. For the top collar here, I used the pattern that is available in the Successful Dressmaking book. I copied it exactly as was, just added, a bit of a point to the tip of the collar. And the under collar, I started off with the pattern in the book, so same as the top one, and then I just made a couple of alterations to obviously the point here, I drew on where I wanted the point to sit and then extended it by that much. I also added an extra centimetre to the length of the whole collar itself, just so that that part of the collar is visible when the top collar is folded over the top. So there you have it. That's a pretty quick and basic rundown of how I made my mock-up of my third and hopefully final Beauxbatons uniform. Next week I'm going to start the process of actually creating the final version. So I'm going to be dyeing fabrics and cutting them up and sewing them together, and I'm really nervous about them because they weren't cheap fabrics. But anyway, so if you want to see my journey of actually creating the Beauxbatons uniform itself, please come back next week. It is going to be fun.